In this second section, we'll look at the history of sociology. So sociology was a discipline, academic discipline that started in Europe. It emerged in the mid-1800s, and there were four main factors that contributed to its development, its emergence. First is the Industrial Revolution, and this is when machines, right? Factories were created. There were more factories around this time, and people worked, spent more time working on machine. And so with this, the Industrial Revolution, more people moved from rural areas and to live in the city. So they have more contact with each other, and they could meet more people, right, of different backgrounds, not just their family members or their neighbors. And also because now increasingly there's, the machines are replacing at least a big part of human labor. People now can be more productive, make more stuff, and yet at the same time also have more leisure time. So as a result, they can spend time to meet with each other, to talk, to spend more time on hobbies and so on. So as you can see, right, Industrial Revolution drastically changed the ways in which people live. A second factor was a political revolution. It's particularly the ones in the US and France, which made people realize that, wow, they themselves can be powerful agents of shaping, changing their social world. Third factor was colonialization and imperialism, which brought Europeans who were traveling, exploring other parts of the world outside of Europe to come in contact with people who are very different from them in terms of cultures, whether that's religion, dress code, their etiquettes, their values, and so on. And lastly, the last factor was the scientific methods that was developed in the natural sciences. For example, Galileo, right, who used the scientific method in order to study astronomy. Newton, used the same method in order to study physics, and so on. And the scientific methods were quite successful in these fields, so there were a number of people who advocated the application of the scientific methods to the investigation of the social world. So as a result, by the mid-1800s, sociology was developed as an academic scientific discipline. And about 40 to 50 years later, by the late 1900s, sociology arrived in the US. Now, let's look at some of the early sociologists who played a very important role in shaping this academic field. Now, they all came, from different backgrounds because, before sociology was, became as a scientific field, these individuals belonged to other academic, scientific disciplines. So one of whom was, Auguste Comte, who is considered as the father of sociology. He's the one who coined the term sociology. And he also advocated positivism, which is the application of the scientific methods from the natural sciences to the investigation of the social world. So here is approximately 9-minute video of who he is, and in particular how he's very important for sociology. I recommend you to pause this lecture video for a little bit and watch this YouTube video about him. So go ahead and pause this video. Okay, so by now you should have finished watching this video about Auguste Comte, and next let's talk about Karl Marx, who is quite famous. His background is in philosophy. He had a macro perspective of our society, and he is particularly known for arguing that society is made of at least two major groups. the haves and the have-not, right? And there is conflicts, competition between these two groups for limited resources in our society. So this idea has been quite instrumental in shaping how sociologists see the world, and particularly in one of the major theoretical, one of the major sociological paradigms that we will discuss, which is conflict theory. A third major sociologist is Herbert Spencer. He believed that society is evolutionary, that it is continually evolving to become better, right? And this is how society can survive. And so he coined this quote. He coined the idea of survival of the fittest, which I think many mistakenly attribute this to this idea to Darwin, but in fact it was Herbert Spencer who coined this concept. Another major early sociologist is Emile Durkheim, a French sociologist, and in fact he was the first sociology professor. Like Karl Marx, he has a macro perspective of our society. In particular, he is known for this idea of social integration. He believes that society is made up of different parts, different institutions, different members, who all have different functions, right? And they are glued together, right, by social values, because they need each other in order to survive. No one can be good at everything. They need to support each other. So, for example, currently I am your instructor. My role right now, my function is to teach you. But who knows, in several years, you could be, the engineer, the medical doctor, the banker, who I will go to for your service. So according to Durkheim, we need each other. We work together in order to support each other, so that way we all can survive. And this is how society, a successful society, can evolve and be more, because they're much more fit to survive on the macro level. And last but not least is Max Weber, a German sociologist who, unlike Emile Durkheim and Karl Marx, has a micro perspective of our society. So he looks at individual interactions. He wants to know how individuals relate to each other, communicate with each other, and he focuses particularly on symbols. So whether it's language, our actions, how we wear, what we wear, how we behave, and so on. So we look at how we exchange information with each other and the meanings that we attach to these symbols, and how they shape how we see each other and how we see ourselves, and how we act accordingly based on those perceptions. Now, I would like to discuss several forgotten sociologists whose contributions were quite important, but were not recognized, and it wasn't until much more recently that we're now digging into their own works and uncovering, wow, they did a lot of amazing things to sociology. So here is a wheel of some of the particularly women sociologists that I added to the slide, so that way you can look at and can research a bit more about these phenomenal women sociologists. I'd like to focus on particularly two women. One is Harriet Martineau, who is considered as the first woman sociologist. She published Society in America way before Durkheim, right, the first sociology professor, way before Weber were even born. So this work, Society in America, along with another work that she, very important contribution that she made, it's called Retrospect of Western Travel. So both of these work were considered as the first systematic methodological international comparison of social institutions. So as you can see, she is a pioneer in her own right as a sociologist in so many ways. But she was not very recognized for her contribution in sociology at all. In fact, she is simply known as someone who translated Comte's ideas into English, which was important, but it's also important for us to emphasize and recognize her other contributions as well. Another major women sociologist is Jane Addams, who not only researched society as a sociologist, but also applied what she discovered in her sociological studies into her own social reform works. So in 1889, for example, she founded the Whole House, which aimed to help the most marginalized, especially the poor, through this social project. And she is, through her phenomenal social work, she won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's the only sociologist who won this prize. Last but not least is W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the first African American to earn PhD from Harvard, and he received his PhD in sociology. He researched race relations in the U.S. He published about a book a year on this subject between 1896 and 1914. And even though he, despite his accomplishments, right, getting PhD from Harvard, being quite, a committed researcher, studying race relations in the U.S., he encountered a lot of prejudices and discrimination in his professional and personal life. So, for example, when he goes to professional sociologist meetings, he was not permitted to eat or stay in the same hotels as the white sociologist. So, because of his, he, of course, obviously, he became very frustrated with all the prejudice and discrimination that he faced, that he, along with Jane Addams and Florence Kelley and others from the Whole House, founded NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So it wasn't until recently that his contribution to sociology were almost completely overlooked. So in summary, in this section, we looked at the context, the historical context in which sociology emerged as a discipline in Europe in the mid-1800s, and later on arrived in the U.S. About 40 or 55 years later. And several early thinkers play pivotal roles in laying that foundation for establishing sociology. And they all came from different academic disciplines, such as philosophy and psychology, or other natural sciences. However, it's important for us to remember there were also many other important early sociologists who made significant contributions to sociology, but their works have only been recently recognized, such as the works of W.E.B. Du Bois. So this concludes this section's lecture.